Okay, imagine a scenario for a moment. You walk into your office, say Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, you're ready to start your day,
Yep, I'm with you.
and your boss stops you at the door. They tell you that, effective immediately, your hours have shifted.
Oh, no.
You're not working 9 to 5 anymore. You're now on a split shift. So mornings and late nights. Oh, and by the way, they've doubled your caseload.
Because someone quit, I'm guessing.
Someone in another department quit, exactly.
That sounds like the start of a really, really bad day.
It gets worse. You go to check your employment contract, or maybe you call your union rep to say, hey, this can't be right, and you just hit a brick wall.
Nothing.
You find out that legally you are barred from negotiating these specific terms. You have, well, zero input.
In the private sector, we'd call that just terrible management.
Or a good reason to update your LinkedIn profile, right?
Immediately.
True. But let's add one more layer to this nightmare. Imagine you raise a safety concern. Let's say this new workload is causing errors that actually endanger the public. You file a formal complaint, but instead of a quick meeting to fix it, you enter this legal labyrinth that takes, like, a year to resolve.
Whole year.
And while that battle drags on, costing a fortune, you can't walk out. You can't strike. You just have to sit there and take it.
That sounds less like a job and, more like a system that's designed to break people.
Well, according to the stack of documents we're looking at today, this isn't a hypothetical. This is the daily reality for thousands of public sector employees right here in Washington, D.C.
So today we are doing a deep dive into what's being called the Push for Labor Progress, or P4LP. It's a fascinating and honestly a pretty tense look at the structural breakdown between D.C. government management and its public sector unions.
We have a really dense stack of sources today. We're looking at internal issue papers from AFGE Local 2725. We have comparative data on strike laws across the entire U.S., which was genuinely surprising.
Oh, really?
And a draft piece of legislation with just a massive name.
Right.
The Good Faith Bargaining, Dispute Transparency, and Cost Accountability Act of 2026.
And our mission here is to really unpack why the sources describe the current system as a fundamentally uneven playing field. We're not just talking about, disgruntled employees venting.
No.
We are looking at a systemic failure that is costing taxpayers millions of dollars. We're going to explore why there's this sudden and pretty controversial push to legalize public strikes in the nation's capital.
And then look at this proposed Moneyball-style solution that tries to fix the system using data instead of, picket lines.
Yeah, that's the interesting part.
So let's get into the machinery of this. The core of the whole dispute seems to revolve around two, well, kind of dry legal terms.
But with massive real-world impacts.
Exactly. Management rights and the gag law.
Right. Let's start with management rights. This is all codified in D.C. Code, Section 1.617.08. Now, usually when we hear management rights, we think, the basic right of a boss to run their business.
Sure, someone has to be in charge. Deciding strategy, hiring people.
Exactly. But the code here, it goes much, much further. This provision gives D.C. government agencies sole authority. That's the key phrase here.
Sole authority over what?
Over hiring, promotions, discipline, internal security, and crucially, tour of duty.
Tour of duty? That sounds almost military, like you're being deployed.
It does, doesn't it? In this context, it effectively just means your schedule, the hours you have to be at work. The law also gives them sole authority over the technology of performing work.
Okay, I want to push back on this for a second. I'm playing devil's advocate. Isn't that just efficient government? If the DMV needs to stay open later to help people who work during the day, shouldn't a manager have the right to say, okay, everyone, we're working late? If they have to negotiate every single schedule change, nothing would ever get done.
And that is the classic argument for strong management rights. Efficiency. You need a captain to steer the ship. But the counter-argument from the union, which is laid out in these issue papers, is that this statute is being, well, weaponized. It's not just about steering the ship anymore. It's about changing the voyage without asking the crew.
Can you give me a concrete example? How does that play out in real life, not just in the legal code?
Okay, take that tour of duty clause. Imagine you are a single parent working for the city. You've built your entire life, your childcare pickups, your commute, maybe you have a second job, all around a specific schedule.
Of course.
And then suddenly, management unilaterally shifts your hours because they have the sole authority to do it. They don't have to ask you, they don't have to bargain, they just do it.
And your whole life just falls apart.
Exactly. The union argues that because they're legally barred from bargaining over this before it happens, they can't protect their members. They can't say, hey, we can do the late shift, but we need 3 weeks' notice for childcare. They're just locked out of the room until the damage is done.
Which connects directly to the second legal hurdle you mentioned, the gag law.
Right, technically it's section 617.17.
But the sources just call it a gag law about compensation. Does that mean they can't talk about their salary? Because that sounds, well, illegal in itself.
It's a little more subtle than that. It's about when and how they can talk about it.
Mm.
The law effectively prevents transparency in negotiations on pay and benefits until very late in the process. The union claims this creates a black box.
Okay.
So if you can't have an open, transparent conversation about pay scales and working conditions up front, you end up with a compensation package that just doesn't match the market.
And the ripple effect there, I'm guessing, is about who actually wants to take these jobs.
Precisely. It's all about talent retention. The sources argue this degrades public services, your libraries, schools, sanitation, because you can't attract or keep good people if the pay discussion is secret and dictated from above.
So we have a system where managers have unilateral control and talks about money are restricted. The sources argue that because unions can't negotiate these things at the start, the problems don't just disappear.
They fester, and then they explode. This is the part of the data that really jumped out at me, because the system blocks negotiation at the front end, the let's solve this over coffee stage. Everything becomes a legal fight on the back end.
The litigation spiral. We have some pretty shocking numbers on this, don't we?
We do. The documents highlight a massive spike in cases filed with the PERB.
That's the Public Employee Relations Board.
Right. Think of it as the Supreme Court for these agency disputes. It's where you go when you just can't agree. Filings jumped from 35 in FY 2023 to 101 in FY 2024.
Wait, hold on. Let's pause on that number. That is nearly a 200% increase in 1 year. That is not a statistical anomaly. That is a trend line pointing straight up.
It is a system failure. And requests for arbitration reviews, they more than doubled in that same period. What this tells us structurally is that the lower levels of conflict resolution have just collapsed.
So instead of a manager and a union rep solving a roster issue quietly,
It's being escalated to a full-blown legal battle.
which brings us to the cost. I mean, these aren't free, right? Lawyers aren't cheap.
Not at all. This costs taxpayers millions. Legal fees, back pay, administrative time. The Office of Labor Relations is spending roughly half its time just fighting lawsuits. But there's a human cost, too. The sources describe a detrimental impact on morale.
That makes sense. If every disagreement feels like a lawsuit, the workplace just becomes toxic.
It's adversarial by default. You
Right.
stop seeing your boss as a leader and you start seeing them as, I don't know, the defendant.
Exactly. The workers feel voiceless, managers feel besieged, and when people feel voiceless for long enough, they start looking for a louder way to be heard.
Which brings us to the nuclear option.
The right to strike.
Yeah, this is usually the third rail of public sector politics. You touch it, you die.
I think most listeners probably just assume that government workers, they just can't strike. It feels like a fundamental rule. If firefighters strike, the house burns down.
Right.
And in D.C., under Code Section 1617.05, it is explicitly illegal.
It is. But the sources we have, they're really challenging the philosophy behind that ban. They quote John Steuben, a famous labor figure, who said, "To abandon the strike is to abandon the concept of wage labor. It is refusal to work when conditions of work become unbearable."
That's a heavy quote. It's basically saying if you don't have the right to say no, you aren't really a free worker.
That's the philosophical argument. But here is the reality check that really surprised me in the source material. They included this map of the United States comparing strike laws.
I saw that. I think we all just assume D.C.'s ban is the standard.
I definitely did.
Yeah.
But looking at this map, it's not.
Not even close.
D.C. is actually quite strict compared to a lot of places. The map shows that states like Alaska, Hawaii, Oregon, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, they all allow public sector strikes in some form.
Hold on. Let's look at Ohio for a second.
Yeah.
That's a fairly conservative state in a lot of ways. You're telling me a government worker in Ohio can just walk off the job?
Well, no. And this is the nuance that's so important here. Even where it is legal, it is not a free-for-all. The sources emphasize that almost every state with legal strikes has this massive carve-out for essential personnel.
So the police and firefighters we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Police, firefighters, corrections officers, they're almost universally excluded. even in very pro-labor states like California or Illinois. You just can't have the 911 dispatchers walk out. Society would collapse.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better. So we're really talking about administrative staff, maybe teachers, sanitation crews, librarians.
Right, but even then, how do you prevent chaos? If teachers strike on a Tuesday with no warning, parents are stranded.
The economy takes a hit.
That's where the guardrails come in. The sources list these strict requirements. You have to exhaust all mediation efforts first. There are mandatory cooling-off periods, and you have to give advance notice.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, in Hawaii and Ohio, unions have to give a 10-day notice before a strike can even happen.
So it's not an ambush. It's more like a scheduled event.
Precisely.
Mm.
And the proposal that's being put forward in D.C. mirrors these guardrails. They're asking for a certified, simple majority vote from the members, so it has to be Democratic, and a mandatory advance date notice.
They aren't asking for the Wild West. They're asking for leverage.
It's all about the threat, isn't it?
It's like having a big stick you never intend to use.
It is. If the other side knows you can strike, they might actually listen to you about that tour of duty change before it gets to a walkout. It forces a recalculation of value, as one of the texts puts it.
But let's look at the political reality. This is Washington, D.C. The city is not a state. Congress has oversight. The idea that Congress would sign off on legalizing strikes for federal-adjacent workers just seems, I mean, unlikely.
It is a massive political lift, and we'll get to the politics of D.C. autonomy in a minute. But because that strike option is so explosive, the sources present a second option, a legislative fix that's much more technical, but, potentially just as powerful.
And this is the legislation with that really long name, the Good Faith Bargaining Act of 2026.
This is what you called the Moneyball solution earlier.
I love this concept. It's not about people holding signs in the street. It's about changing the incentives inside the bureaucracy with data and money.
Right. So start with the problem statement. The Office of Labor Relations, the OLRCB, is just completely overwhelmed. Tiny budget, about $3.4 million, and litigation takes up half their time. They're too busy fighting fires to, prevent them.
So this act proposes a skin-in-the-game approach. Break down the mechanisms for us. How does this force a manager to behave better?
It's a three-part mechanism. First one is transparency. Every agency would have to file an annual labor management dispute report.
Okay, that sounds like typical bureaucratic paperwork. Why is that a weapon?
Because of the detail. They have to list every single grievance, what it was about, discipline, overtime, safety, and crucially, they have to identify the management level involved.
So if there's one specific manager in the Department of Transportation who's causing 90% of the grievances because he's a tyrant, that data is now public.
Exactly. They can't hide in the aggregate numbers anymore. It creates specific accountability.
I see.
The mechanism, too, is thresholds and C-caps. If an agency has too many grievances or arbitrations, say a 20 or 25% escalation rate, they trigger a corrective action plan, a CAP.
They get put on a performance improvement plan. That's ironic. Usually, managers put employees on those.
The tables are turned. Under this law, the agency heads, they have to explain the root cause of the dysfunction. And, here's the kicker, they have to testify about it before the D.C. Council.
That is a very strong deterrent. No agency director wants to be hauled in front of the city council with cameras rolling to explain why they can't manage their own staff. It's public humiliation.
It is. But mechanism 3 is the one that really changes the math. Cost accountability.
Okay.
Under this proposal, agencies that sue too much, agencies that keep losing in arbitration but they just keep fighting anyway, they have to pay a surcharge.
A surcharge, like a fine.
Yeah, exactly. They have to pay into a special training fund. And the money goes toward good faith bargaining training and early mediation services.
I love that logic. It's basically you break it, you buy it. If you're bad at management, you have to pay for the training to fix it.
It aligns the incentives. Right now, if an agency wastes money on legal fees, it just comes out of some big general legal pot. The manager doesn't feel it.
It's play money.
Right. But this makes the agency feel the pain in their own budget. The whole idea is that if bad management costs money, they'll be motivated to solve problems early.
So we have two paths here. The structural fix, legalizing strikes, which changes the power dynamic through force, and the technical fix, this legislation, which changes the dynamic through financial incentives and, well, shame.
And both are aiming for the same thing, getting management to come to the table and actually negotiate. But we can't ignore the bigger context here. One of the sources gets really philosophical about it.
Right.
It draws this parallel that I hadn't really thought about before, the connection between D.C. statehood and labor rights.
Yeah, I saw that. It seemed like a bit of a stretch at first, but when you dig into their agency argument, it starts to make
It
sense.
does. The text explicitly links the two concepts under the banner of self-governance.
We should clarify agency in the psychological sense, not the government building sense.
Correct. The argument is that D.C. residents want freedom from federal oversight. They want to govern their own taxes and laws. They don't want a manager in Congress telling them what to do.
And in the same way,
In the same way, workers want the agency to negotiate their own safety and their own compensation.
there is a quote here that just hits hard. It compares the ban on collector action on strikes to denying someone the right to leave an exploitative relationship.
It's a heavy analogy. It argues that if you can't walk away, or in this case, withdraw your labor, you're in a relationship defined by imbalance, not consent.
The source argues that both statehood and labor rights are really about dignity, the right to have a say in your own fate.
And there's always a but. In D.C., we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the political risk. This is D.C. It is not a state. Congress has final oversight over its laws. The source material is very open about this. They call it the fear of retaliation.
The fear that if D.C. passes a law allowing strikes, Congress might just swoop in and say, absolutely not.
Or worse, they could see it as D.C. being unable to manage its own affairs and limit home rule even further. The nightmare scenario is the return of a financial control board.
For our listeners who might not know, just remind us what that was.
In the 90s, D.C.'s finances were in such bad shape that Congress appointed this unelected board to run the city's budget. It was effectively a suspension of democracy. And D.C. leadership is terrified of that happening again.
So that leads to what the sources call defensive governance. D.C. leadership is often afraid to make bold moves because they don't want to poke the bear in Congress.
Exactly. But the source material, it offers a counter-argument to that fear.
Mm.
They argue that governing defensively, making decisions based on what Congress might do, hasn't actually worked. It just preserves a broken status quo.
So what's their strategy? Just pass the law and hope for the best?
Their strategy is readiness.
Mm.
They argue for preparing the legislation now. Do the research, build the coalition, write the bills, so that when the political terrain shifts, maybe a different Congress, a shift in national sentiment, D.C. is ready to move immediately.
It's a bold strategy. It's effectively saying, let's build the car now so we can drive it as soon as the road opens.
That's a great way to put it.
So let's try to bring this all together for the listener. We have a system where managers currently hold all the cards, unilateral control over hours, workload, discipline.
The workers feel gagged, and the dispute resolution system is just absolutely clogged with expensive lawsuits because nobody is talking to each other.
And we have these two proposed paths forward. The Moneyball Act, which uses transparency and fines to force better behavior.
And the nuclear option of strikes, which forces a balance of power.
And hanging over all of this is the question of D.C.'s own autonomy as a city.
It really comes down to a battle between two values, efficiency and equity. Management rights are about efficiency, the ability to make decisions fast. The P4LP movement is about equity, the right to participate in those decisions.
And I think it's important to land on why the listener should care, even if you don't work for the government, even if you don't live in D.C.
You pay for it.
Right. You pay for the lawsuit.
You pay for the lawsuits, you pay for the turnover, and you pay in the quality of service. When a librarian is burned out because their schedule was changed 3 times this month, or a sanitation worker is resentful because they can't get safe equipment, the service you get suffers.
Burnout is expensive.
It is. When the labor system breaks down, the people who actually run the city suffer. And when they suffer, the city doesn't work. It's that simple.
It reminds me of the closing thought from one of our sources. It quotes St. Augustine, of all people. An unjust law is no law at all.
It raises a pretty provocative question to end on. If the people tasked with running the government feel they have no voice in how it is run, can that government effectively serve the people? Or is it just a machine grinding its own gears?
That is certainly something to chew on next time you're waiting in line at the DMV. That's it for this deep dive into the push for labor progress. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.